Have you ever found yourself, completely overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of information out there?
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Yeah, you're scrolling through endless how-to guides or maybe sifting through mountains of advice, well-intentioned, sure, but often conflicting advice.
Right. Or relationship tips that just seem to make everything more complicated, not less.
Exactly. It's a feeling I think many of us know all too well in this, well, modern, hyper-connected world we live in. The sort of prevailing wisdom always seems to tell us we need to add more.
Add more data, add more strategies, more complex knowledge.
It's always about accumulation.
Indeed, we are constantly bombarded with this idea that the solution to pretty much any problem lies in just accumulating more, in
Sure.
becoming more sophisticated, or building more elaborate systems.
But what if? What if the real power, the true clarity, lies in doing the exact opposite?
What if less isn't just, more efficient, but actually more robust,
Mm.
more insightful, and ultimately maybe more liberating?
That's precisely what we're here to explore today in this deep dive. Our mission is to really unpack a truly counterintuitive yet incredibly powerful philosophy.
Yeah, one that challenges our natural inclination towards just piling things on.
We're drawing heavily from the profound insights of Nassim Taleb's Antifragile and also some other compelling sources you've shared with us.
Our core journey today will shed light on two interconnected ideas, often overlooked, I think.
Okay.
First, there's via negativa, which is essentially the power of subtraction, defining things by what they are not, by what to remove.
Okay. Subtraction. Got it. And the second.
And second, less is more, which highlights the surprising and often disproportionate effectiveness of simplicity, focusing on just the critical few elements that truly matter rather than getting lost in all the noise.
Right. Cutting through the clutter.
Precisely.
Exactly. So our aim is that by the end of this deep dive, you'll have hopefully a brand new lens, a way to view information differently, to make decisions, maybe even to understand your human interactions better.
Cutting through that complexity to find some robust, essential truths.
Yeah, allowing you to gain knowledge that isn't just more plentiful, but fundamentally more reliable. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So to really grasp the significance of via negativa and less is more, I think we first need to set the stage a bit. We need to understand the very nature of our perceived reality and maybe how easily we fall into the trap of overcomplicating it.
Right. And our sources start with a rather profound, almost startling assertion that anything around us is, at its core, nothing but an idea.
Wow. Okay, unpack that a little. Everything is an idea.
Well, think about it. People, relationships, even how we understand ourselves, they aren't really tangible fixed objects, are they? They're collections of ideas. Or maybe projections, created and held together by the mind.
So like my relationship with someone isn't a physical thing. It's a concept we agree on.
Exactly. What's truly fascinating here is how this seemingly simple concept, that reality is largely a mental construct, paradoxically leads to immense complexity. And often it leads to what the sources call manipulation strategies in our daily lives.
How so?
Take the example you just mentioned, relationships. Your relationship with, say, a husband or a wife, it's largely defined not by some physical bond, but by some idea, right?
Yeah.
An agreement or a shared narrative. And that allows for certain behaviors, certain discussions, shared activities.
It's a mental construct we collectively agree upon.
And that construct then dictates our actions, our expectations.
And this understanding of reality as ideas, ironically, often pulls us into this deep trap of overcomplication.
You see it everywhere.
You really do. People consulting astrologers, tarot card readers, or sometimes, even certain kinds of therapists, not always for genuine introspection or growth, but for, well, handling relationships.
It becomes about finding a strategy, doesn't it? Acquiring the strategic advantage, getting a playbook, rather than fostering authentic connection.
Yeah, the goal shifts from understanding yourself or the other person to just finding the right moves in what feels like a game.
That's precisely it. You see this obsessive strategizing about how to behave in so many scenarios.
Oh, definitely. If she ghosts you, do this. Or if he doesn't text back in an hour, do that.
Right. How should you flirt to maximize impact? When exactly should you ask for the first kiss to guarantee success?
It stops being about genuine connection, about letting human interaction just happen naturally.
Instead, it transforms into this elaborate game strategy. And this mentality, it isn't just limited to personal interactions, is it?
No, not at all. It pervades our news cycles even. Stories often frame political actions or economic maneuvers like these complex chess games.
Where players are constantly cheating, claiming property, all based on these elaborate, almost theatrical manipulations, always designed to gain an advantage.
And the consequence of all this, the sources describe it quite vividly. You feel so engrossed, just completely absorbed in this orchestra of
They're
manipulation,
constantly performing.
constantly competing for attention, for validation, for perceived status. And there's this relentless drive to categorize people, too.
Oh yeah, the alpha, beta, gamma types.
Right. And then creating rigid rules for how to behave based on those perceived characteristics, trying to turn the fluid, messy reality of human interaction into some predictable, controllable system.
It's absolutely exhausting, isn't it?
It really is. And it raises this important question for all of us. If we are constantly strategizing, constantly competing in this orchestra, where are we all actually heading with this endless rulemaking and overanalysis?
That's a profoundly important question because it points to a critical difference in how we can navigate the world. The source presents a crucial contrast to this relentless strategizing.
Which is?
The immense value of having a resting place or an anchor.
An anchor. What does that mean in this context?
It isn't about being disengaged from the world or from human interaction. Not at all. On the contrary, it's about having a core stance, a fundamental perspective, a kind of foundation that you can always return to, no matter how chaotic or complex the situation gets.
Okay, so like a home base for your mind.
Sort of. Think of it this way. For some people, that orchestra of manipulation, the constant strategizing, the endless competition for attention that is their life, 204/7.
They're just living in it all the time.
Exactly. They don't have a place to come back to. They're just always immersed in it. But the alternative, what the source refers to, perhaps metaphorically as enlightenment, helps you precisely because it provides a vantage point.
A different perspective.
Yes, a perspective from which you can observe the orchestra without being forced to be a frantic participant within it.
Ah, so you can see it happening, but you're not swept away by it.
Exactly. From that vantage point, you can look from that perspective, allowing you to engage with the world, to experience its joys and its challenges, but without becoming too engrossed, without becoming a full participant in that endless cycle of overanalysis and manipulation.
You can sort of dip in and out.
You can indulge, you can engage, but you always have that anchor, that resting place to return to. This perspective offers a profound understanding, maybe summed up as, nobody is yours, it's just your turn.
Oh, that's interesting. What does that imply?
It implies that relationships and experiences aren't possessions, really. They're transient moments, almost like passing the parcel in a game. They come, they go.
That provides a crucial contrast to the prevailing information overload and strategizing we just discussed, doesn't it? It offers a path towards clarity, maybe resilience.
I think, though, a way to navigate without getting lost.
Now, with that understanding of our, let's say, often overcomplicated world, let's dive into the core of our discussion today. This truly liberating power of subtraction. A philosophy known as via negativa, or the negative way.
Yes, and this concept is incredibly potent because it fundamentally challenges our usual way of thinking. We almost always think about addition.
We do, don't we? Always adding more.
Right. So at its heart, via negativa is this profound idea that understanding what something is not is often far more powerful, more robust, and ultimately more truthful than trying to find what it is.
Okay, so focus on the not. How does that work?
It's about removal, about eliminating what is false or unnecessary rather than constantly trying to build up positive assertions.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, to illustrate this point, our sources offer a really intriguing historical example. For a surprisingly long part of human history, think ancient Greek and Roman societies. For instance, they had no distinct name for the color blue.
No word for blue, seriously.
Seriously, they perceived it certainly, the sky, the sea. But it wasn't codified as a unique color in their language in the way we think of it. Yet somehow, as the source notes, we managed rather well without it.
That's genuinely mind-bending to consider. Functioning without a word for blue for so long, what does that tell us about the limits of our language?
Well, and conversely, the power of what exists beyond our linguistic grasp, right? The sources expand on this. They explain that there are many things without words that we know, that we can act on, but we simply can't describe them directly.
Things we feel or understand implicitly.
Exactly. They argue that anything around us of significance is hard to grasp linguistically. In fact, they suggest that the more powerful or fundamental something is, the more incomplete our linguistic grasp of it becomes.
So the bigger the concept, the harder it is to pin down with words.
Precisely. We operate on it, we understand it implicitly, but trying to define it positively with words can be futile or even limiting. It forces us to define something by its absence, by what it isn't.
Which is the essence of via negativa.
That's it. And this concept isn't new. It has deep philosophical and artistic foundations, echoing through centuries.
Where does it come from originally?
Well, for instance, in mystical theology, particularly with Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, he was a theologian from the 5th or 6th century.
Okay.
There was a profound focus on what God is not through a systematic process of elimination, literally saying, not this, not this.
Apophatic theology, right?
That's the term, yes, apophatic theology.
Mhm.
It avoids direct, positive descriptions of the divine because it recognizes the inadequacy of human language to capture ultimate truth.
So instead of saying what God is, you say what God isn't.
Exactly. You approach truth by listing what cannot be said, what cannot be attributed.
Yeah.
It's a recognition that the most profound truths often elude our direct linguistic grasp. Just like trying to perfectly define a feeling like love or profound beauty, by defining God, or any really complex phenomenon, by what it is not, we approach a more humble, yet paradoxically maybe more accurate understanding. We clear away misconceptions, rather than building these fragile, positive assertions that are always vulnerable.
That makes sense. You're clearing the clutter again.
Right. And it's worth noting, by the way, that the pseudo-qualifier for Dionysius the Areopagite's name stemmed from a historical mix-up. He was confused with Dionysius the Alag, an Athenian judge. This is a historical footnote there.
Ah, interesting clarification. And does this connect elsewhere?
Oh, yes. It connects to the Neoplatonists as well, like Proclus, who famously used the metaphor that tattoos are carved by subtraction.
Tattoos. By subtraction. How does that work?
Think about it. You don't typically create a traditional tattoo image by adding more ink to build it up line by line. Instead, you create it by removing the surrounding material, by scratching or carving away the non-tattoo parts.
Right, revealing the image underneath.
It's a powerful visual, isn't it? Showing creation through negative space, through what is removed.
Which naturally leads us to that classic, often repeated anecdote about Michelangelo.
Yes.
When he was asked about the secret of his genius, specifically how he carved the statue of David, arguably one of the greatest masterpieces of all time.
His answer was disarmingly simple.
I just removed everything that David is not.
Exactly. This is such a memorable and concrete example of subtractive creation. It illustrates that genius isn't always about what you add, what you sculpt or construct,
But often about what you meticulously, painstakingly take away.
revealing the essence that was already there, just hidden by the superfluous stuff.
Okay, so if that's the creative power of via negativa, how does it apply to knowledge itself, to how we understand the world?
Well, the sources argue pretty strongly that the greatest and the most robust contribution to knowledge consists in removing what we think is wrong.
Removing wrong ideas is the best way to gain knowledge.
That's the argument. This approach, which they call subtracting epistemology, leads to negative knowledge. And negative knowledge is fundamentally more robust to error than positive knowledge.
Why is it more robust?
This aligns perfectly with the philosopher Karl Popper's influential idea that disconfirmation is more rigorous than confirmation.
Disproving is stronger than proving.
Exactly. Think of it with the classic black swan example. If you make the statement, all swans are white, how many white swans do you need to see to confirm it?
Millions. Billions. You could never see them all.
Right. Millions wouldn't be enough to make that statement definitively true because you can never observe all swans throughout all time. But
But if you spot just one black swan,
then you can be quite certain that the statement, all swans are white, is wrong. One single observation can decisively disprove a universal statement, while millions of confirming observations can hardly make it definitively true.
okay, that's a powerful illustration.
The profound takeaway here is to maybe shift your intellectual strategy. Instead of constantly seeking affirmation for your existing beliefs, actively hunt for the evidence that could disprove them.
Look for the black swans in your own thinking.
Precisely. This negative knowledge is far more robust and leads to a clearer, less error-prone understanding of the world. Whether you're evaluating a news story, a scientific claim, or even a personal decision.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because while Popper's idea is powerful, transformative even, the sources do acknowledge some crucial nuances, some criticisms.
Yes, absolutely. Disconfirmation isn't always quite so black and white in practice.
How so? What are the nuances?
Well, for example, an experiment might fail. But that doesn't necessarily mean the underlying theory is wrong. It could just be bad luck, or faulty tools, or even simple human error in how the experiment was conducted.
Or, going back to the swan, what if you thought you saw a black swan after an all-nighter doing research, or maybe you were just observing under very poor light conditions, making a white swan appear dark?
Exactly. So while negative knowledge is generally more robust, it's not absolutely infallible. There can be errors in disconfirmation too.
But the general principle holds.
I think so. The general principle remains that failure or negative information tends to be significantly more informative and actionable than success or confirmation. It narrows down the possibilities with greater certainty.
That's the crux. Negative knowledge helps us narrow down possibilities and eliminate falsehoods with greater certainty. It's a more reliable, maybe more humble path to understanding.
Clearing the path rather than cluttering it.
So, with this powerful understanding of via negativa, how do we apply it, in our everyday lives?
Well, the sources offer some brilliant practical applications. For one, spotting charlatans.
Spotting charlatans using via negativa, how?
Well, they argue charlatans are recognizable in that they will give you positive advice and only positive advice.
Ah, think of all those how-to books.
Exactly. Titles like 10 Steps for Financial Enrichment, Guaranteed Weight Loss, Effortless Friend-Making, Instant Innovation.
They always tell you what to do, what to add, what positive steps to take.
Right. What they almost never tell you is what to start doing, what to remove, what negatives to avoid.
So the lack of negative advice is a red flag.
It can be a very strong indicator, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in practice, you'll find that it is the negative that has often been selected by evolution and used by the truly wise or the truly successful.
How does evolution select for the negative?
Well, consider chess grandmasters, for instance. They typically win not by making brilliant, risky attacking moves all the time, but overwhelmingly by not losing.
They focus on avoiding errors.
They focus on avoiding errors, on eliminating threats to their position. Similarly, people tend to become rich more reliably by not going bust, by managing downside risk, than by constantly chasing grand high-risk gains.
Avoid the catastrophic loss.
Precisely. And religions, too, when you look closely, are mostly about interdicts. Thou shalt not.
The Ten Commandments, yeah. Mostly don'ts.
Exactly. Mostly a list of things not to do. This demonstrates that avoiding harm is often a more powerful and reliable strategy than pursuing positive outcomes, which are often unpredictable and fragile.
That's a profound shift in perspective. It's about risk reduction through subtraction rather than just chasing elusive positive outcomes.
Our personal risks, whether in health, finances, relationships, are often significantly reduced thanks to a small number of measures.
And those measures focus on...
On removing negatives, on avoiding pitfalls. Think about basic health advice. Don't smoke, moderate alcohol, wear a seatbelt. It's mostly subtractive.
Right. And you can't reliably predict who will succeed in life, can you? There are just too many variables, too much luck involved.
Very hard to predict success. But, as the source points out, you can pretty much predict the negative that a person totally devoid of skills will eventually fail.
Okay, so failure is more predictable than success in some ways.
Often, yes. So instead of trying to identify the next big success story, a more robust strategy might be to identify and remove what will lead to failure. Avoid the known paths to ruin.
This applies to larger systems too, doesn't it? Like government.
Yes, especially in government and political structures. The source argues that a good mechanism is one that helps remove the bad guy, rather than constantly trying to identify and promote the supposed good guy.
Who might, despite good intentions, cause unforeseen harm.
Exactly. John Elster, in his work like Preventing Mischief, draws upon Jeremy Bentham's idea. Bentham argued that the art of legislature is primarily to prevent anything that hinders liberty and intelligence.
So it's about clearing the path again, removing obstacles, safeguarding against bad actions, rather than trying to engineer specific positive outcomes from the top down.
It's about building robust systems by eliminating known vulnerabilities, known ways things can go wrong.
It powerfully reminds me of classical wisdom too. The source quotes Ali bin Abi Taleb, who apparently said, "Keeping one's distance from the ignorant person is equivalent to keeping a company with a wise man."
Wow. That's a purely subtractive approach to wisdom and association, isn't it?
Completely. You gain wisdom, or at least you avoid foolishness, by actively avoiding the negative, by removing detrimental influences, not just by seeking out positive ones.
It's a powerful and very practical heuristic for self-improvement. Just avoid the fools.
Easier said than done sometimes, but the principle is clear.
And for a modern, maybe more iconic take on this, consider the words of Steve Jobs.
Ah, yes. What did he say about this?
He famously said, People think focus means saying yes to the thing you have been going to focus on, but that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the hundred other good ideas that they are there. You have to pick carefully.
Saying no is the key to focus.
He went on, I am actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no 2,000 things.
Wow. Saying no 2,000 times, that is a powerful contemporary example of via negativa in action.
Absolutely. It demonstrates that even in the most creative and innovative fields, subtraction, the art of saying no to the multitude of good but non-essential ideas, is absolutely key.
Key to achieving true focus and groundbreaking results. It's about relentless elimination to uncover what's truly essential.
You got it.
Okay, so building on that profound power of subtraction, let's transition into another crucial application that flows directly from via negativa. And that's the wisdom of simplicity, often encapsulated by that phrase, less is more.
Yes, and this isn't just about, being efficient or minimalist. It's about achieving superior performance, often by embracing a kind of intellectual humility.
How does it connect directly to via negativa?
Well, this idea suggests that simpler methods of forecasting and inference can work much better than complicated ones. You're subtracting complexity.
Right. Less complex models can be better predictors.
Often, yes. Think about the groundbreaking work of people like Spyro Makrodakis, Robin Davis, Dan Goldstein, and especially Gerd Gigerenzer.
Gigerenzer, yeah, he coined that term.
Fast and frugal heuristics. Simple, ecologically rational rules of thumb that enable us to make good decisions despite having limited time, limited knowledge, and limited computing power.
So simple rules for a complex world.
Exactly. It's about choosing intellectual humility and focusing on the core relevant information rather than aiming for these super sophisticated, complex models that often just collapse under real-world uncertainty.
Can you give an example of a simple heuristic being better?
Sure. Gigerenzer talks about the gaze heuristic in baseball. To catch a fly ball, skilled players don't subconsciously calculate complex physics trajectories. They just keep their eye on the ball and adjust their running speed so the angle of the ball relative to the horizon stays constant.
A very simple rule. Keep the angle the same.
Incredibly simple and incredibly effective. Far more effective in the real world than trying to solve differential equations on the fly.
Okay, so how does this less is more idea play out in the real world, especially in these unpredictable environments we keep talking about?
Well, our sources point to its effectiveness, particularly in domains with extreme effects or rare events. What Taleb calls black swans.
Ah, the unpredictable big events.
Right. In these areas, focusing on just a few critical elements yields disproportionate results. The advice is almost blunt. Just worry about black swan exposures and life is easy.
Easy. That sounds too simple.
Well, maybe not easy, but simpler. The point is, you don't need to predict everything in a complex system, which is impossible anyway. You just need to identify and protect yourself from the truly devastating rare events.
Because those are the ones that fundamentally shape reality in those domains.
Precisely. And this insight ties into an evolution of Pareto's famous 80-20 rule.
Where 20% of the effort yields 80% of the results, or 20% of people own 80% of the land. That idea.
That's the classic formulation. But our sources highlight that in many domains today, we're increasingly moving into an even more uneven distribution. What Taleb calls extremistan, or maybe the 991 rule.
991, so 1% accounts for 99%.
Pretty much. This isn't just a slightly skewed distribution like 80-20. Extremistan describes domains where a truly minuscule fraction of inputs accounts for almost all of the outputs.
And that changes everything, doesn't it?
It fundamentally changes how we predict, how we manage risk, how we seek impact. For instance, the source cites examples like 99% of internet traffic is attributable to less than 1% of sites, or 99% of the book sales come from less than 1% of authors.
Wow. So in such a world, focusing on averages is useless. Or even dangerous.
Exactly. Averages become meaningless. You must identify and address the extreme outliers, the black swans that drive everything. Focusing on the typical is a waste of time.
That's truly staggering when you think about it. A tiny fraction of causes accounts for the vast majority of effects. So what's the practical implication for us?
Well, the source suggests that often a 1% modification of a system can lower frigidity by about 99%. Or maybe fragility is a better word there.
So a tiny fix can have a massive impact if you find the right leverage point.
Precisely. You don't need to fix everything. You just need to identify and remove the critical few negative elements or address the critical few drivers. It's the power of leverage through subtraction, again.
Do the sources give more examples of this 9991 or extreme distribution?
Oh yes, several compelling ones. Consider public health or social welfare. Often, a very small number of homeless individuals might account for a hugely disproportionate share of state costs due to complex health and social needs. Identifying and helping that small group has an outsized impact.
Okay, that makes sense. Where else?
In a corporate setting, think about it. Often a small number of employees cause most of the problems or consume a disproportionate amount of management time.
The squeaky wheels.
Right. Or, conversely, a small number of customers often generate the vast majority of revenue. On a more personal level, the source mentions experiencing 95% of the smear postings from the same three obsessive people. Once you identify and manage those few, the problem largely evaporates. Similarly, data shows the sickest 10% of a population might consume 64% of healthcare costs. Suggesting a focused approach to care for that group can have an outsized impact on the whole system.
Right. And even corporate cost overruns.
Often attributed to a small number of large, complex technology projects, not the smaller, everyday expenses.
It really hammers home the point, doesn't it? If you want to make things better, safer, or more effective, often the most powerful approach is to just work on removing the pebble in your shoe.
That simple mantra encapsulates it perfectly. The power of identifying and eliminating the core irritant, knowing that it will likely yield outsized positive results, far more than trying to add layers of new solutions on top.
It's about finding that central thing to worry about, like in real estate where the mantra is location, location, location.
Exactly. By focusing on that singular, most critical factor, the location, the idea is that the rest takes care of itself, more or less. You're not trying to optimize every tiny detail of the house first. You're focusing on the one thing that truly drives value and livability.
Okay, another critical application of less is more, battling information overload and improving decision-making, especially now in our data-rich age.
Yes, and it's profoundly counterintuitive, isn't it? Because as the source states, we have never had more data than we have now, yet have less predictability than ever.
More data, less certainty. How does that work?
Well, the sheer volume of information can actually hinder our ability to make good decisions, not improve it. We collect more, but we seem to understand less. We drown in it.
Can you give an analogy?
Think of it like crossing the street. If you obsessively pay attention to every single detail, the eye color of the people around you, the brand of their shoes, the precise angle of that street lamp, you might completely miss a big truck hurtling towards you.
Because you're distracted by irrelevant information.
Exactly. The key is to remove data, anything but the essential threat. It's about focusing ruthlessly on what truly matters for your survival, for your core objective, and disregarding the irrelevant details, no matter how interesting or available they might seem. Filter aggressively.
And this paradox of data, it's evident when you compare different fields, right?
Glaringly evident. Physics, for instance. It often uses relatively little statistical backup for its core theories, but produces profound, incredibly accurate, and replicable results. Think ego-see fraud, not a lot of statistics there.
Right, and compare that to
Fields like political science and economics. They're often, as the source puts it, full of elaborate statistics and incredibly complex models. Yet the source argues rather bluntly they've never produced anything of note in terms of reliable prediction or grand, lasting theory comparable to physics.
why the difference, according to this view?
The fundamental reason, the source points out, is that black swans, those unpredictable, high-impact rare events, essentially run the socioeconomic world. And these events, by their very nature, cannot be predicted by statistics based on past data alone.
So more data doesn't help predict the things that matter most in those fields.
Exactly. More data doesn't equate to more insight, especially when rare, extreme events can invalidate entire statistical models built on historical averages. It's perhaps the ultimate argument for intellectual humility over statistical hubris. Less, but better focused information might be superior.
And there's psychological evidence for this too, isn't there? That famous invisible gorilla experiment.
Ah, yes, a classic. In this groundbreaking psychological study, participants were asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball and simply count the number of passes made by the team in white shirts.
Okay, a focused task.
Very focused. While they're engrossed in counting, a person in a full gorilla suit walks right into the middle of the players, beats their chest, and then walks off screen.
And people miss it.
A staggering percentage of participants, because they were so focused on counting the passes, completely failed to see the gorilla. They had no recollection of it afterwards.
Wow. That powerfully illustrates how too much focus on details, or on a specific narrow task, can literally blind us to the obvious and the significant.
To the gorilla in the room. We don't see what's right in front of us because we're looking too hard at the wrong things, or simply at too many things. Our attention filter, overloaded, screens out the unexpected.
So, this understanding that less focus, or maybe differently directed focus, can sometimes lead to more clarity. That leads to some powerful heuristics for decision making.
Yes, directly. And one personal heuristic highlighted by the sources is quite provocative, maybe even counterintuitive at first.
Let's hear it.
If you have more than one reason to do something, just don't do it.
Wait, more than one reason is bad. Why?
Well, the thinking isn't that one reason is inherently superior to two mathematically. It's more psychological. The argument is that invoking multiple reasons often indicates you're subconsciously trying to convince yourself. You're rationalizing a decision that isn't truly clear or compelling on its own.
Ah, so if it's not obvious with one strong reason, maybe it's not the right decision.
That's the idea. Obvious, truly good decisions, by contrast, often require no more than a single reason. Their rightness feels self-evident. You don't need to build a complex case for them.
That's so true, actually. It rings with a certain psychological insight. When you're trying to list reasons, you're often trying to sell it to yourself.
Exactly. And it reminds me of the example given of the French Army's heuristic. Apparently, they used to reject absenteeism excuses if a soldier offered more than one reason.
Really?
Well, if someone claimed, say, the grand death of grandmother and a cold virus and being bitten by a wild boar.
Okay, yeah, that sounds suspicious.
Right. The sheer accumulation of excuses made each individual one less credible. It suggested fabrication.
And this applies beyond excuses.
The sources suggest so. For instance, if someone attacks a book or an idea using more than one argument, especially if the arguments seem unrelated or weak.
It might signal that the criticism isn't really hitting a core flaw, that it's maybe grasping at straws.
Exactly. It's likely not real in the sense of being a fundamental killer critique. Similarly, for a criminal, you wouldn't list their bad table manners alongside murder and theft when describing their crimes.
Well, that would be absurd. It would dilute the serious charges.
Precisely. The irrelevant additions dilute the impact of the core decisive points. The more you pile on, often the weaker the individual points become, revealing perhaps a lack of singular, strong conviction or evidence.
Fascinating. So less is more even in argumentation.
And this brings us to what the source rather amusingly calls Bugason's razor, which is basically an application of Occam's razor, but specifically to ideas and intellectual contribution.
Bugason's razor. Okay, what's the principle?
A philosopher should be known for one single idea, not more.
One big idea.
Is that realistic?
It's about distilling down to the absolute essence, identifying the one profound contribution that truly defines an intellectual's legacy. Think about the great thinkers. Often they are associated with one core concept.
True. Like Darwin and evolution, Freud and the unconscious.
Exactly, and it relates to that famous anecdote about Albert Einstein, when the writer Paul Valery asked Einstein if he carried a notebook to write down his many brilliant ideas.
What did Einstein say?
His legendary reply was apparently, "I never have ideas."
Huh. Of course he had ideas. Of course. But the quote, even if slightly apocryphal, speaks to the power of singular foundational insights. Insights that emerge from deep, focused thought, rather than just a constant barrage of fleeting, disconnected thoughts. It suggests a profound, distilled clarity over mere intellectual prolificacy.
One deep well, rather than many shallow puddles.
That's a good way to put it. And it leads to a rather striking heuristic mentioned in the sources.
Which is?
If someone has a long bio, I skip him.
Seriously, ignore people with long resumes.
Well, the implication isn't to ignore accomplished people, but to be wary of those with, say, 300 academic papers and 22 honorary doctorates, but no other single compelling contribution or main idea behind it.
Quantity over defining quality.
Exactly. What's truly fascinating here is how often less truly is more, especially when it comes to genuine intellectual depth and impactful contributions. It's not necessarily about the sheer quantity of output or the length of the CV.
But about the quality and the singularity of a truly profound, defining idea.
Right. This isn't meant to diminish hard work or extensive research, of course, but rather to elevate the power of distillation, focus, and subtraction in the intellectual pursuit. Finding the core insight is key.
So we've really journeyed quite far today, from that feeling of being overwhelmed by modern complexity, by the sheer volume of information,
And that sense of drowning in advice and strategies.
through to the liberating power of subtraction, this idea of via negativa.
And then into the radical, maybe counterintuitive simplicity of less is more.
We've seen how removing what is wrong or what is unnecessary or what is just plain distracting can be far more effective and certainly more robust than constantly adding more, constantly seeking new solutions to just pile onto existing problems.
We've unpacked how our reality is often this collection of ideas and how overcomplicating these ideas through endless strategies and manipulations can lead to that sense of being perpetually engrossed in a game, maybe without a resting place or a solid anchor.
And the negative way, via negativa, offers a robust path forward. By defining what things are not, whether we're looking at mystical theology or artistic creation like Michelangelo's David, or even how we approach knowledge itself through Popper's idea of falsification.
Right, focusing on what could be reliably removed or disproven.
And finally, less is more shows us how focusing on the critical few, especially when dealing with extreme events or these power law domains where 991 rules
They're
apply,
just stripping away excessive, irrelevant data to make clearer decisions.
can yield disproportionately powerful results. It comes back to that idea of finding the pebble in your shoe.
That one crucial negative element, that core irritant, and removing it, knowing that that tiny adjustment can sometimes alleviate immense friction and unlock incredible clarity and progress.
It really shifts the focus from addition to subtraction, from complexity to simplicity.
Which raises, I think, an important question for you, our listener, as you navigate your own world, your own decisions, your own information streams.
How might you identify the non-Davids in your life? The things that need to be removed, the distractions to ignore, the unnecessary data points, the harmful advice to disregard.
What single pebble in your shoe can you focus on removing, maybe in your work, maybe in your relationships, or even just in your approach to information that would yield disproportionately positive results?
What would it truly mean for you personally to embrace the elegance, the power, and the sheer robustness of saying no, of subtracting, and of cultivating a profound, effective simplicity?